January 8th, 2007. A woman dies in a hospital bed in Woodland Hills, California. The room is quiet. No photographers crowd the hallway. No reporters wait outside with microphones. The television in the corner stays dark. There is no final press release, no studio statement, just a name on a chart, and then nothing. Her name was Margaret Yvonne Middleton. But 60 years earlier, a man named Walter Wanger stood before the press, looked into a pair of gray-blue eyes, and announced with total, unblinking conviction that she was the most beautiful girl in the world. The most beautiful girl in the world died in a charity hospital for broke entertainers. That is not bad luck. That is not a sad coincidence. That is the story of exactly how Hollywood works and exactly what it does to the people it decides to use. Hey, before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I genuinely love knowing. Her name was Yvonne De Carlo. Hollywood made her a legend. Then Hollywood forgot she existed. In this video, we find out why. September 1st, 1922. Vancouver, British Columbia, a city that smells of salt water and sawdust and quiet desperation. Margaret Yvonne Middleton comes into the world in a rented house on a street where the neighbors know each other's hunger. Her father, William Middleton, is a salesman, which is another word for a man who is always somewhere else. He will prove that definition with painful accuracy. She is 3 years old when he leaves, 3 years old enough to feel an absence. Young enough that the memory of him will never fully form, just a shape of a man where a father should have been. A silhouette. A missing piece she will spend the rest of her life trying to fill. Her mother, Lily De Carlo, is a woman carrying an unfinished dream. She wanted the stage. She wanted the spotlight. Life gave her a waitressing apron and a daughter with cheekbones that stopped strangers mid-sentence. So Marie made a decision. The kind of decision that quietly shapes a child's entire identity without the child ever consenting to it. She enrolled little Yvonne in a dance school at age 3, not to give her joy, to give her a future, to give Marie a second chance. My mother always said I was born to be in pictures. I believed her. For a long, long time, I believed her. Those are Yvonne's own words, written decades later in her autobiography. And you can hear in them something that is not quite pride and not quite bitterness. Something in between. The sound of a woman who has finally been given enough distance to see clearly what was done to her before she was old enough to choose differently. There is a particular kind of damage that comes from being a parent's second chance. You don't grow up asking what I want. You grow up asking, am I enough yet? You perform. You're perfect. You smile wider. You dance harder, not for yourself, for the hungry eyes watching from the wings. By the time Yvonne was 15, her body had become a project. Her posture was correct. Her footwork was disciplined. Her smile was practiced. A dance instructor named June Roper in Vancouver had taken her under her wing and pointed her toward something more serious than recitals. She performed at the Orpheum Theater as a hula dancer in a revue called Waikiki. She booked a week at a new nightclub called the Palomar. She was not yet a star. She was becoming a product. In 1937, Marie packed their bags and took her daughter to Hollywood. The dream was simple and brutal: become a star. The reality was equally simple and equally brutal. Nobody called. Nobody cared. The studios were not looking for a 15-year-old girl from Vancouver with good cheekbones and a disciplined plie. They went home to Canada with nothing but bus fare and bruised pride. But Marie De Carlo was not a woman who accepted defeat quietly. By 1940, they were back. Yvonne was 18 now. Tall, dark-haired, with a face that cinematographers would later describe as architecturally perfect. She danced in chorus lines at night. She knocked on studio doors every day. She ate cheap and slept in cramped apartments, and told herself this was temporary. It was never temporary. She began collecting credits the way desperate people collect lottery tickets. Small, unremarkable, piled up in hope. A bathing beauty here. A nameless extra there. A native girl, a secretary, a girlfriend with no lines. She signed a 3-year contract with Paramount Pictures in 1942, which sounds like a triumph until you understand what it actually meant. It meant Paramount owned her time, controlled her image, and cast her in uncredited bit parts, while collecting the value of her face, without giving her the material to prove what else she was capable of. She was not building a career. She was surviving one. And yet she kept showing up. That discipline that Marie had drilled into her since age 3, the thing that had felt like pressure and obligation for so many years, turned out to be the one tool that actually worked in a city designed to exhaust people into quitting. Yvonne De Carlo did not quit. She was constitutionally incapable of it. Every morning she woke up and she went back. Every rejection she absorbed and kept moving. By 1944, she had appeared in over a dozen films and been credited in almost none of them. She was 22 years old and invisible. But here is the thing about surviving long enough in Hollywood. Eventually the machine notices you, not because you have demonstrated your depth, not because you have proven your range, because you have a face that fits a mold they need filled right now. And in 1945, Universal Pictures found exactly the mold they needed. They were making a film called Salome, where she danced. They needed a woman who looked like a myth. They needed dark eyes and high bones and something that read as exotic and slightly dangerous on a Technicolor print. They needed Yvonne De Carlo. And that is where everything begins. And that is where everything ends. The film was called Salome, where she danced. The plot was thin, the costumes were thinner, but producer Walter Wanger took one look at Yvonne on screen and did what Hollywood producers have always done. He reached for a superlative large enough to justify his investment. The most beautiful girl in the world. 6 words, printed in papers across the country, wired to gossip columns, repeated in radio broadcasts. 6 words that would follow Yvonne De Carlo for the rest of her life and eventually become her cage. The film opened to mixed critical notices and enormous box office returns. Audiences did not care about the script. They cared about the woman in the center of it. Dark eyes flashing, silk scarves trailing, moving through the frame like something exotic and slightly dangerous. Universal understood immediately what they had. They had a type. And Yvonne De Carlo was the perfect actress to wear it. What followed was a decade of careful, deliberate packaging. Universal cast her as Arab princesses, as dessert seductresses, as Eastern European temptresses, as women from nowhere, specific from a vague geography of mystery that existed only in the Hollywood imagination. She was Scheherazade in the Song of Scheherazade. She was the enigmatic Anna in Criss Cross alongside Burt Lancaster. She was the pirate queen, the harem girl, the woman of the sands. The films had different titles. They had the same woman. And Yvonne played them all with a professionalism that was, in retrospect, quietly heartbreaking because she was good. Genuinely, technically good. Critics who bothered to look beyond the costumes noticed a precision to her work, physical intelligence, a way of using her body to communicate what the scripts could not be bothered to put into the dialogue. The New York Times, reviewing Criss Cross in 1949, wrote that De Carlo brings a genuine electrical charge to every scene she occupies and that she is more than the film deserves. More than the film deserves. A polite way of saying she was trapped in material unworthy of her. But nobody at Universal was interested in finding material worthy of her. They were interested in finding material that required her type. And her type, by the late 1940s, was selling tickets by the millions. She was photographed constantly. The fan magazines printed her face on their covers. Howard Hughes, a man with an instinct for beautiful women and an inability to treat them as anything more than acquisitions, orbited her for years, the way powerful men orbit women they want to possess, but cannot quite claim. She was briefly engaged to actor Howard Duff. The engagement fell apart. The studios didn't care. Romance was publicity. Breakups were publicity. Every chapter of her personal life was another story for the gossip columns, and another reason for audiences to buy a ticket. She was a commodity being traded in real time, and nobody asked her how she felt about it. By the early 1950s, she had made over 30 films. She was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. And she was deeply, quietly aware that recognition and respect are not the same thing, that being seen and being known are not the same thing, that a million people could know your face and not one of them could tell you who you actually were. She was 30 years old. She had been performing since she was 3, and she had never once been handed a role that asked her to be complicated. Then, in 1956, Cecil B. DeMille called. DeMille was not a man who made small gestures. His films were events. His sets were cities. His vision of history was operatic and absolute and utterly his own. And he wanted Yvonne De Carlo to play Sephora, the Midianite shepherdess who becomes the wife of Moses, played by Charlton Heston in The 10 Commandments. She did not take the role lightly. She prepared for months with an intensity the studio had not even required of her. She took weaving lessons at UCLA. She took shepherding lessons in the San Fernando Valley. She worked with a drama coach on the specific emotional architecture of a woman who loves a man she can never fully reach. A woman who stands at the edge of greatness and is never permitted to step inside it. She knew that character. She understood her from the inside out. The New York Times noticed. Yvonne De Carlo as the Midianite shepherdess is notably good in a severe role, the critic wrote, a performance of quiet conviction. Quiet conviction. She was 34 years old. She had been in the industry for 15 years, and finally a critic was seeing past the costumes and the technicolor and the exotic type packaging and seeing the thing she had been trying to show them the entire time. A woman, a real specific, irreplaceable woman who could act. She was expected to receive an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She declined the category, insisting on being listed as a lead. She was not nominated. It was the kind of decision that looks like pride and is actually something sadder. A woman so starved of being taken seriously that she would risk the recognition entirely, rather than accept it in the diminished form they were offering. She won a Laurel Award instead. She smiled for the cameras, and then Hollywood, having briefly looked at her clearly, looked away again. The machine that builds you does not ask your permission. Before it begins dismantling you, it does not send a letter. It does not call a meeting. It simply stops calling. The phone rings less. The scripts are thinner. The offers come from smaller studios. The budgets shrink. You are still you, the same face, the same talent, the same professional discipline that built everything. But you are no longer new. And Hollywood is a city that runs on the fuel of newness. By the late 1950, the specific type that Yvonne De Carlo had been hired to embody, the exotic beauty of vaguely Eastern origins, was falling out of fashion. The studios had found other faces to fill those costumes. Younger faces, fresher imports from Europe. The same mold recast with newer material. And Yvonne De Carlo, at 35, at 37, at 39, found herself doing something she had never expected to do, competing for the roles she had pioneered. The offers that came were not nothing. She worked consistently through the late 1950s, appearing in westerns and adventure pictures and television guest spots. She was professional. She showed up. She delivered. But there is a difference between working and ascending, and she knew it. Everyone in Hollywood knows it. The industry has its own atmosphere, and you can feel the pressure change before anyone says a word. She was quietly, efficiently, moving toward the exit. But the professional erosion was only the surface wound. The deeper cuts were coming from home. She married Bob Morgan in November 1955. He was a stuntman, a man whose entire career was built on absorbing the physical punishment that the stars could not take. Rugged, quiet, dependable. Not a Hollywood fantasy, a real man with no interest in the gossip columns and no patience for the performance of a celebrity. He was the first person in her adult life who seemed to want Yvonne and not the type. She loved him, genuinely loved him, in a way that is different from the performance of fan magazines. They had 2 sons, Bruce, born in 1956 with Cecil B. DeMille as godfather, and Michael. For a brief window in those early years of the marriage, Yvonne De Carlo was something she had never quite been permitted to be before. Ordinary, and it felt like oxygen. Then came June 1962. The production was How the West Was Won, a massive MGM epic shot in Cinerama, across multiple directors and dozens of locations. Bob Morgan was working as a stuntman on a railroad sequence. The shot required a flatcar loaded with logs to move through the frame. Something shifted, the load came loose. Bob Morgan was struck. His left leg was crushed beyond saving. He lost his leg. He spent months in the hospital and years in rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world that had always demanded physical perfection from the men who worked in it. The man who came home was still Bob, but he was carrying something new and immovable, and the weight of it pressed down on everything around him. The medical bills were catastrophic. This was the early 1960s, before unions had real teeth, before studios carried meaningful liability for what happened to the bodies of the people they hired to perform their most dangerous work. The money that Yvonne had earned through 15 years of relentless professional labor began to drain. She started taking every role offered, regardless of quality, regardless of whether it was beneath what she had built. The survival instinct that had carried her from Vancouver to Hollywood was activated again, cold and efficient. She needed work. She needed money. She needed something that would pay consistently and not disappear after a single season. In 1964, a television producer named Joe Connolly called with an offer. The show was called The Munsters. The premise was a family of universal monsters living in a suburban American neighborhood, played entirely for comedy. Herman Munster, a Frankenstein creation with the emotional range of a golden retriever. Grandpa, a vampire with delusions of grandeur. Eddie, the werewolf child navigating grade school. And Lily Munster, the matriarch. A vampire wife in a floor-length black dress with a streak of white in her hair, utterly devoted to her monstrous husband, utterly convinced that her family was completely normal. Connolly offered Yvonne the role. She did not deliberate. She did not negotiate for something more artistically ambitious. She had 2 sons, a husband in medical rehabilitation, and a mortgage that did not care about her artistic legacy. She took it. Later she would say, in the careful language of a woman who had learned never to show the full depth of a wound in public, that it was a happy show, that everyone enjoyed working together, that the audience responded. She was right on all 3 counts. The Munsters ran for 2 seasons and 70 episodes. It was a genuine hit. Children adored it. Families watched it together on Friday nights. And Yvonne was extraordinary in it. That needs to be said clearly and without qualification. She brought a warmth and a timing and a complete physical commitment to Lily Munster that the character's comic conception did not require but absolutely elevated. She was the emotional center of the show, the straight line against which all the absurdity played. In a cast of monsters, she was, paradoxically, the most human presence on screen. But the Munsters did to her career what a label does to a bottle. It told the audience exactly what was inside and made it very difficult to imagine anything else. The mechanism of this destruction was invisible, which made it more effective. Nobody sent a memo. Nobody made a conscious decision. It happened the way all branding happens, through repetition and association, until the image becomes the reality. By the time The Munsters ended in 1966, Yvonne De Carlo was Lily Munster. Not in her own mind. Not to the people who had followed her work since Salome, but in the only mind that mattered in Hollywood, the collective shorthand of casting directors and producers and studio executives who needed to make decisions quickly and reached for the nearest available summary. She was a punchline, a Halloween costume, the ghoulish wife, the woman who had stood in the Egyptian desert filming the 10 Commandments, who had prepared for her role with the rigor of a serious artist who had been told by the New York Times that she was more than the films deserved, was now being asked to reprise her monster makeup for television specials and promotional appearances. She did it because she was professional, because she needed the money, because saying no is a luxury that belongs to people with options. The marriage to Bob Morgan ended in 1973. 18 years, 2 sons, a shared catastrophe. The divorce was quiet. No tabloid drama, no public accusations. Just the slow, private collapse of 2 people who had been carrying too much weight for too long and had finally, separately, set it down. She was 51 years old. In 1971, 2 years before the divorce was finalized, she had done something remarkable. She made her Broadway debut in Stephen Sondheim's Follies. She played Carlotta Campion, an aging showgirl of magnificent irrelevance, and she sang a song that everyone in that theater understood, on some level, was not entirely fictional. The song was called I'm Still Here. It was a catalogue of survival, of enduring, of outlasting the trends and the fashions and the men and the mockery and the years of being underestimated and overexposed and quietly discarded. And when Yvonne De Carlo stood on that Broadway stage and delivered those lyrics, she was not performing a character. She was reading her own file aloud. The audience rose to its feet. Then the run ended. The reviews moved on. Broadway moved on. And Yvonne De Carlo, at 49 years old, recently separated, her film career a memory and her television identity a costume, went back to doing what she had always done. She kept working, she kept showing up. She absorbed the diminishment and kept moving, the way she had been trained to do since she was 3 years old on a dance floor in Vancouver, performing for an audience that needed her to be extraordinary, so that they did not have to reckon with the ordinary weight of their own lives. She was still here, for now. In her final years, Yvonne De Carlo lived at the Motion Picture and Television Fund Hospital in Woodland Hills, California. A facility built for entertainers who had given the industry their youth, their health, their best decades, and arrived at the end with insufficient means to care for themselves. It is a good facility. It is a compassionate institution. It is also the kind of place that exists because an industry knows, somewhere in its collective conscience, that it tends to discard the people who built it. She was comfortable. She was cared for. The 2 stars embedded in the sidewalk of Hollywood Boulevard, one at 6124 for motion pictures, one at 6715 for television, still caught the California sun and shone back at the tourists who walked over them without knowing whose name they carried. When she died on January 8, 2007, the obituaries were respectful and brief. Most led with Lily Munster. A few mentioned the 10 Commandments. Almost none spent time with the 20-year journey that preceded the fame. The dance schools, Vancouver rented rooms, the years of uncredited roles, the mother's relentless borrowed ambition, the 15 years of professional survival before anyone learned her name. Almost none asked the question that seems, in retrospect, to be the only question worth asking. What did Yvonne De Carlo want? Not what she was, not what she accomplished. What did she want for herself in the privacy of her own ambition, when the cameras were off and the costumes were hung and the fan mail had been sorted, and she was alone with her own reflection? We do not know. And that silence is the most damning indictment of the system that shaped her. Hollywood's golden age ran on a particular engine: the consumption of human beauty. It found people who possessed it, packaged them into commodities, sold those packages to a global audience hungry for glamour. And when the commodities' market value declined, it moved on to the next product. The people inside the packages were, in this calculus, incidental. Yvonne De Carlo is not a unique story. She is a recurring story. She is the story of every woman who was told that her face was her value and discovered too late that value depreciates. What makes her particular iteration so precise, so clarifying, is the detail of the title itself. The most beautiful girl in the world. Not the most talented, not the most disciplined, not the most worth listening to or the most capable of surprising you. The most beautiful. A mirror has no self. A mirror exists only to reflect back what stands before it. Hollywood looked at Yvonne De Carlo and saw a perfect mirror, a surface that could reflect their fantasies back at them in Technicolor at 24 frames per second. And they used her accordingly. But mirrors are not people, and people, when treated as mirrors for long enough, eventually lose the ability to find themselves in the reflection. She came from a mother who needed her to shine. She entered a machine that needed her to dazzle. She spent 60 years performing variations of a character that was always someone else's idea of who she should be. The exotic type, the devoted wife, the comic monster, the surviving showgirl. Each role is a costume. Each costume was worn until the industry found a reason to replace it. And yet, there is something that resists the neat tragedy of that conclusion, something in the record that pushes back. She sang "I'm Still Here" on a Broadway stage at 49 years old and brought an audience to its feet. She wrote her autobiography at 65 and told her own story in her own words, without apology and without revision. She raised 2 sons. She outlasted the men who packaged her, the studios that discarded her, the critics who underestimated her, and the decades that tried to make her irrelevant. She was still here. For 84 years, she was still here.
The tragedy of Yvonne De Carlo is not that she was forgotten. Plenty of people are forgotten. The tragedy is that she was never fully known. Not by the industry that used her face, not by the audiences that loved her image. Perhaps not even entirely by herself, given how early the performance began, and how rarely anyone gave her permission to stop. Fame is a transaction. The price is paid in self. And the title they gave her, the most beautiful girl in the world, was never a compliment.
It was a contract. One she signed before she was old enough to read the fine print. She is still buried under that title. And somewhere underneath it, there was a woman. Specific. Complicated. Irreplaceable. Worth knowing. We just never got the chance. Thank you for watching this video. I mean that genuinely. There are 1,000 things you could be doing right now, and you chose to spend this time with the story of a woman that most of the world has forgotten. That says something about you. It says you understand that the lives behind the curtain matter, that the machine does not get to be the only narrator. Yvonne De Carlo deserved more careful critics. She deserved a Hollywood that looked at a woman with her discipline and her talent and her extraordinary dark beauty and asked, "What else can you do instead of will you wear this costume again?" She deserved to be known, not just seen. She got the costume. She wore it. She survived. And there is something to be said for that. For the woman who stood on a Broadway stage in 1971 and sang "I'm Still Here," not as a lament, but as a statement of fact, a full accounting of everything endured and everything outlasted. She was still here. Until she wasn't. If this story moved something in you, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel and find stories like this one. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is a good time. We do this every week, and next week we are going somewhere just as dark. If you are already part of this community, you are the reason this channel exists, and I am grateful for you every single time I sit down to write. We also have a Patreon where I go deeper on stories like this one. Extended research, behind-the-scenes notes, early access to new episodes. The link is in the description if you want to come join us. And if someone in your life needs to hear the name Yvonne De Carlo today, share this video with them, because she deserves to be remembered. Not as Lily Munster, not as the most beautiful girl in the world, as herself. Sweet dreams.